With Mass Effect Andromeda, Commander Shepard is a thing of the past and replaced by Ryder. Is this game capable of reaching the same heights as the other games in the series, or is it a bust? Story. Mass Effect Andromeda begins in 2185, between the events of the second and third games in the original trilogy. The four Citadel Council races and the Quarians are planning to populate new home worlds in the Andromeda Galaxy as part of a plan called the Andromeda Initiative. Each race sends 20,000 citizens on a one-way, 600+ year journey to Andromeda aboard their own transportation vessel called an Ark, led by a Pathfinder who are aided with an integrated AI called Sam. Once the human Ark arrives, however, things turn out to be much worse than predicted, and the planets chosen for colonization turn out to be less than stellar worlds to do so, caused by an unknown phenomenon called the Scourge. As Pathfinder, it falls on you to fix this and to pave the way for a new human civilization to rise. Graphics. As to be expected, the graphics in Andromeda are the best in the series yet, with careful attention given to detail and environments. You'll visit planets and set pieces that can be amazing to look at, with plenty of variety in between the areas. Cruising on your Nomad through a rough desert with a massive ship in the background, or finding yourself upside down on a hostile ship while enemy fire rains upon you are moments that really stand out. Tirelessly wading through an alien jungle in search of remnant technology really makes the game come alive. Inhabited or abandoned settlements can be found all over, most of which are enticing to explore and filled with all manner of things. The range of structures is diverse, but since there are so many of them, they do tend to end up being rather repetitive after many hours of play. When it comes to character models and animations, it's hit or miss. Generally, the character models are high quality and animated well in cutscenes, and I've seen some emotional facial animations that I've never seen in any other game, including The Witcher 3. But overall, it's certainly not flawlessly done. And the running animation can spaz out sometimes too, which can ruin the immersion too easily. It feels like an issue that probably could have been avoided if the game would have a month or two extra in the oven. Now, as it stands, the animations are good and in many ways an improvement over its predecessors, but not as good as they could and frankly should have been. Disappointing character creator is also a huge step back. However, the weapons and armor sets do look pretty damn cool though. Gameplay. Once you get the narrative ball rolling, you'll get a ship called the Tempest, and you can go about the galaxy exploring. You'll immediately notice the different galaxy map, with this time around much more focus on the actual journey through the stars rather than seeing it on a simplified minimap. It ends up feeling a bit slower, even with the option to skip travel, but it certainly, absolutely enhances the sense of scale compared to the previous games. The universe is massive, and this game certainly makes you realize that. The ship's exterior view is also based on your location on the galaxy map, which I think is a really neat detail. Now, when you land on certain planets, you get to play around on foot or with the Nomad, your Land Rover. Usually when first encountering a planet, there's stuff going down, and because of that you often have restricted movement by way of weather hazards. And here is where I think Mass Effect Andromeda separates itself the most from the previous games. See, everything you do on planets can raise the planet's viability, increasing its potential for colonization, and as a result gradually not only expands the map, but also reduces, if not removes, any hazardous condition as well. This makes it feel like your actions really matter, and the dynamic nature of environments reflects that surprisingly well. Not only that, most areas are just incredibly massive. Anyway, so you got the Nomad, which is Mass Effect 1's Mako's replacement. The Nomad is better in every single way, with it easily dominating steep mountains any day of the week, yet unfortunately lacking in any weaponry. It can be upgraded in a good number of ways to withstand more punishment or drive much more effectively, but alas, no guns for Nomad. As mentioned earlier, since the maps are massive, it's really nice to have the Nomad available and makes cruising around in it quite fun. Now, with the Nomad not being something to really rely on in combat, you at least have plenty of abilities and weapons to defend yourself with and to dispatch enemies with. Most weapons feel tight when shooting, with a variety of different stats and mechanics that make them unique. Combat is quite fast-paced with plenty of chaos in fights, and you'll see enemies try to outflank you often, and they'll use heavy enemies at the most inconvenient times. With the cover system being very dynamic this time around, as well as the AI of the enemies, you'll often be pressured to keep moving and to switch from cover to cover. Getting caught out in the open with your pants down can melt you down quickly, even on normal difficulty. Whichever enemy you face, most fights are quite tense and fun, which is good because combat is something you'll be doing quite often. When it comes to the skills, the system is changed and streamlined, most notably the classes themselves. No longer do you select a class and stick with it, but now instead you switch out your class at any given time. Skills are not tied to your class, but you are instead able to put points into all categories rather than being confined to certain skills. So what does your class do exactly? Well, the unique class skills are now passively integrated into your profile rather than actively used. Unfortunately, the bonuses of being a class or profile are relatively minor and uninteresting, and as a result, the classes themselves lost their distinctiveness and uniqueness compared to the other games. With Mass Effect mostly being known for tight camaraderie whilst defying the odds, Andromeda follows that same formula to great extent. Dialogue is rather extensive, with many NPCs to talk to and many questions to ask. Not only that, Andromeda absolutely loves throwing tough-as-nails decisions in your face too. Many spur-of-the-moment decisions need to be made, some of which with questionable morality. Making these weighty decisions is never boring, and some have pretty interesting lasting consequences. Thankfully, you're often not without input from your fellow crewmates on how to handle certain situations, which goes a long way in bonding with them. Your team itself is rather small this time around, but large enough to provide a satisfying amount of conversations with the widely different people aboard. I must admit though, at first most of the teammates didn't really click with me all that well, certainly not as quick compared to the previous games. I mean, there's no Rex or Garrus in that regard, but after a while they do really grow on you, and they might even start to feel like a new family. Most crewmates have rather complex personalities and their own reasons for joining up with the initiative. Even Ryder's story is rather unconventional, and it's nice to be able to get more insight into his background as well as those of your crewmates. I also really liked the Ryder family dynamic. Dialogue itself is generally pretty well written, if not a bit inconsistent in quality. It can be cliché as well as genius and even hilarious. I also think the game does an excellent job when it comes to bonding with teammates, in which you slowly develop a strong companionship in an overall convincing and believable way. This really makes it feel like you grow as a team throughout your adventure, which in turn really strengthens the epic and emotional moments the game likes to throw at you. While the game technically isn't open world, the worlds sure feel open and the story progression is rather non-linear, with many back and forth traveling between familiar and new places. There is a rather ridiculous number of side missions, divided in multiple categories. Everything crew related is usually pretty well written and diverse. And then there's like the medium priority side missions that feature some interesting storylines but are generally pretty simple and straightforward. And then there's the real filler stuff, indicated by the additional task category, that's probably only really interesting for the avid completionist. There's also a fantastic variety in locations and also a ton of caves to explore. A shame really that the sluggish movement can make moving around in some areas, especially with uneven grounds, feel cumbersome and can ruin the pace of otherwise fantastic exploration. This is because when sprinting or gleefully jumping and jetpacking around, you constantly lose momentum, which causes you to not only stop moving, but you have to get back up to speed again slowly but surely. This stopping and starting quickly gets tedious after a while, although it is somewhat diminished by dashing. If the movement was just purely fluid with no such idiotic speed interruptions, the game would be even more enjoyable to explore. On a more positive note, however, the amount of freedom in movement granted by this game is unprecedented by any other BioWare game, and the mixed-in platforming sections are a surprisingly fun change of pace. Lastly, the game has tons of loot, but unfortunately most of it is lacking in vendor fodder, with the exception of the augmentation mods. Instead, the game features a very in-depth crafting system where you have to research items before crafting, which is where most of the best items are at. To that end, acquiring crafting materials is easy and there's multiple ways of obtaining them. Possibly the most extensive crafting options of any BioWare game to date, and offers plenty of customization if you include augmentation mods. Overall score: the good. Graphics. Planet variety. Wide range of different and creative environments make for some interesting exploration. Size. The game is large and filled to the brim with stuff to do, which can easily last over 70 hours. Teammates. Very diverse cast of crewmates with interesting personalities and surprising depth. Voice acting. A lot of unknown voice actors to me, but they do an admirable job personifying a whole new saga in the series. Romance. Plenty of romance this time around, with even more options to flirt. Combat. Ending. While not perfect, certainly one of the most engaging endings I have experienced in any BioWare game, and certainly a step up from Mass Effect 3's ending. Now, the bad. Horrid inventory management. Just what the hell were they thinking with this UI? The current UI is just so incredibly tedious and unclear to use when it comes to vendoring items, crafting, and checking your quests. Cut off dialogue. Too many quality conversations between teammates being cut off, mostly by Sam, but also by other dialogue overlapping. Repetitive Sam. Pathfinder, this area can be mined for resources. Lack of alien species. Too few aliens are featured in the game, and the new ones are too humanoid. No such thing as a Rachni or Hanar this time around. Tiresome takeoff and landing cinematics. Animation issues. Performance issues. Bugs. Closing words. Mass Effect Andromeda is most comparable to Mass Effect 1, except bigger and arguably better in almost all areas, save for story and perhaps even identity. The story is good, but not as memorable or unique as it was in Mass Effect 1, for instance, which was one of the highlights of that game. Whereas Mass Effect 1 was more cloaked in mystery regarding the mysterious Reapers, the Remnant are similar in that regard, but I feel they're generally a bit too overexposed, which lessens the impact of revelations about them. Which brings me down to my biggest criticism about the game, and that's how safe they've played it. Despite it being one hell of a ride, I wish they would have embraced the new scenario even more with some truly unexpected turns of events story-wise, but instead the story was sometimes a bit too bland, predictable and generic, using story elements already used in the other games with some minor changes. In the end, I'd like to say though that I do think BioWare is on the right track with this game, and it certainly is not a bad way to reboot the series. They paved the way for a new protagonist with the potential to really noticeably grow throughout the sequels if they choose to go for that route. And the 10-hour trial was also a nice gesture I don't often see from AAA developers, and I'm glad they didn't repeat past mistakes with Day 1 DLC, as was the case with Mass Effect 3. Is it worth it? Yes. Despite a few mishaps here and there and quite a rough start, I'd say the game is definitely worth the price tag. It is a high quality game. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I wish you, as usual, a fantastic, scourgeless and cat-free day.